My name is Emily. I grew up among the fog and pine trees along the coast of Maine, and for most of my life, I believed this old wooden house with its uneven floors and salty wind rattling the windows would always be my shelter. After losing my parents in a car accident, my Uncle Paul and Aunt Margaret took me in, and I thought that what we had was some kind of quiet pact. They gave me a roof over my head, and I poured myself into helping them. I worked late shifts at their small-town pharmacy, brought my paychecks home, covered part of the mortgage and groceries, and told myself that these small sacrifices meant I belonged. Over the years, I never questioned it. I thought gratitude and duty could make a family strong enough to last. That illusion shattered the moment I walked into the kitchen on my 29th birthday and saw the envelope waiting on the table. There wasn't a bow or a note scrawled with affection, just my name written in my aunt's sharp, rushed handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the kind they used for grocery lists, folded in half and heavy in my hands for what it meant. The words were short, plain, so matter-of-fact that they cut deeper than a scream ever could. Emily, it's time to start your own life. We can't keep you here anymore. Leave your keys on the dresser. They didn't wait for me to come home. They didn't even look me in the eye. They had packed their bags and driven out to their cottage on the lake, leaving the letter to do the work they couldn't say aloud. I stood there in the stale kitchen light, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, my birthday turning into a deadline. For a moment, I thought maybe this was a misunderstanding, that if I called, they would explain. But the more I stared at those sentences, the more I understood that this wasn't sudden. It had been building quietly for years, like a slow leak you ignore until the floor gives way. That night, I sat at the table alone, the smell of reheated stew lingering in the air, looking at the walls I had painted, the shelves I had stocked, the house I had tried to keep from collapsing every time the bills piled up. Suddenly, all the memories that had once made this place warm, the sound of the ocean through the window, the evenings I came home soaked from work just to find a little space waiting for me, felt cold and strange. Everything I had poured into them didn't buy me a place here. The letter made that very clear. The truth I had been too afraid to name stood in front of me now. This was never really my home. It was a temporary stop, a convenience, and now I had outstayed my welcome. By the time the clock in the hallway struck 10, the house was silent, and so was I. The wind coming off the Atlantic had that sharp bite that crept straight through my coat as I climbed the wooden steps up to the porch, my breath curling in pale streams around my face. The house stood dark except for the faint yellow light seeping from the kitchen window, the kind of light that made the place look less like home and more like a hollowed shell. In my hands, I carried nothing but a small paper bag from a roadside cafe. One slice of carrot cake I'd picked up on the drive back from work, the closest thing I had to a birthday celebration this year. It wasn't much, but I thought maybe, just maybe, sitting at the table with them, even in silence, would feel less lonely than doing it somewhere else. My boots scuffed against the porch as I pushed the door open. Inside, the house was still, the air heavy with the smell of simmering stew and the faint medicinal scent of cough drops and liniment that clung to every corner after years of habit. I hung up my coat on the same hook I'd been using since I was a teenager and listened for a moment, waiting for a laugh, a voice, a sign of life. There was nothing, only the tick of the clock on the wall and the low hum of the old refrigerator filling the space where a greeting should have been. I put the paper bag on the counter, trying not to feel how small it looked there, and sat down at the kitchen table, tracing the grooves in the worn wood with my fingers. The longer I sat, the more I realized there would be no surprise waiting for me. No cake or card tucked away in a drawer. The house was exactly as I had left it that morning. Dishes stacked in the sink, the faint smell of bleach from when I'd scrubbed the counters before work, a stack of unpaid bills on the corner of the table. When the front door finally opened an hour later, and I heard the sound of boots on the entryway rug, a flicker of hope rose up despite everything. Maybe, just maybe, they had been waiting to say something in person. My uncle walked in first, his shoulders hunched from the cold, and set his keys down without looking at me. His face was calm, unreadable. He didn't shout. He didn't sigh. He just stood there, and in that flat, matter-of-fact tone that can cut sharper than anger, he said, "Emily, we're tired. You've been here too long. Tomorrow, pack up your things." No argument, no discussion, no mention of the years I spent patching the leaks, balancing their books, covering their mistakes as if doing so might earn me a permanent seat in this house. It wasn't cruelty, it was finality. A simple full stop. He turned away to hang his coat, and that was that. I sat at the table staring at the paper bag, the single slice of carrot cake inside, realizing that I had never really belonged here after all, and that even my last hope of a shared evening had been too much to ask. I went upstairs without a word, the wooden steps creaking in that slow, familiar rhythm that had been my lullaby for years. My room at the end of the hallway felt smaller than I remembered, like the walls had closed in a little while I was gone. The suitcase stood in the corner where it had been for months, half-packed, waiting like some quiet prophecy I had refused to listen to. I sat down on the bed, staring at it for a long time, my hands resting on my knees, not crying, not moving, just listening to the low whistle of the wind pushing against the thin old window panes. Maybe I had known all along that this was coming, even if I didn't know it would happen tonight, on a night when the house smelled of stew and disappointment. I opened the bag from the kitchen, pulled out the slice of carrot cake and set it on the nightstand untouched. It wasn't about the cake anymore. It was about the truth I had been avoiding for too long. This wasn't my home, and it hadn't been for a long time. Hours passed while I sat in that same spot, thinking about everything I had poured into this place. Every late night at the pharmacy, every bill I covered, every time I told myself that staying was safer than leaving. And then something in me just shifted. It was quiet, small, but final. I pulled my laptop out from under the bed, opened it on my knees, and started with the electricity account. My name filled the login box automatically, my fingers moving without hesitation as I opened the settings and hit cancel on the automatic payments. I moved to the water bill next, the gas bill after that. Each confirmation screen popped up like a clean cut, like a cord snapping free. The internet account took longer, mostly because I had been the one who signed up for it years ago, set all the passwords, made sure the service worked whenever it failed. I clicked through the forms, removed my payment information, and hit confirm. The page went blank, and with it a piece of me that had been tied here for far too long. It didn't stop there. Their insurance policy was still under my account, a favor I had done 2 years ago when they couldn't afford the premium. I hovered for a moment over the remove button, my breath slow and steady, and then clicked. Gone. I closed the tabs one by one, watching the screen dim with every account I severed, feeling something unfamiliar take root inside me. Not revenge, not anger, just a strange, exhausted clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what they needed from me. I was thinking about myself. When the last email confirmation arrived, I closed the laptop and set it beside the untouched slice of cake. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows. But inside, for the first time in a long time, there was a kind of stillness I could finally hear. By morning, the house was already awake without me, and I was gone before the sun reached the cracked windows. I had left my key on the dresser like they asked, walked out without saying goodbye, and spent the night in my car parked 2 blocks from the ocean, the steady roar of the waves my only company. When the first light crept over the horizon, I drove back to grab the last bag from my trunk, checked into a cheap motel for a shower, and finally turned my phone on. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the screen lit up with missed calls, one after another, and then the ringing began again. My uncle's voice came through so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What did you do?" he shouted. "There's no power here, no internet, none of the bills are paid." The sound of him scrambling to understand, of the world tilting because the safety net he never thought about had been cut, was strangely calm on my end. I didn't answer. When his voice broke into another round of yelling, I pressed the red button and let the silence fill the car. A few minutes later it rang again, softer this time. My aunt's number. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but I swiped anyway and held the phone to my ear. Her voice was nothing like his. It was low, unsteady, a whisper almost. "Emily," she said, "we're family. We didn't mean it like that. We just need to figure this out." It was the first time in years she had used that word. Family. And for a moment it caught me, like a snag in the fabric of my resolve. I let her speak, listening as she tried to soften what had already been made hard in writing. But the more I listened, the more I realized that what she wanted wasn't me. It was the safety I had given them, the stability I had built around them without them ever noticing. I closed my eyes, let the voice wash over me like a tide, and then hung up without saying a word. My fingers hovered over the power button, and one by one, I silenced every notification that came after. Later that day, I drove into Portland, the bigger city only an hour away but a world apart from the town I had just left. Molly met me outside her building, a tired red brick structure above a bookstore that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. She hugged me without asking for details and handed me an extra set of keys. That night, in a room no bigger than a dorm, on a pull-out couch with a mismatched blanket, I lay down and listened to the muffled sounds of the street below instead of the creaks of that old house. There was no shouting through the walls, no heavy footsteps on the stairs, no one to ask me for anything. For the first time in years, I slept straight through until morning. A week passed before the quiet turned into something else. I had started to think maybe they would let it go, that the ringing phone and unanswered messages would finally stop. But that morning, my own name came crawling across my feed like a slow poison. There it was, a post on Facebook, written by my uncle, the letters sharp and heavy with accusation. We took in an orphan, gave her everything, and she abandoned us. Now we are left without heat, without power, without family. Pray for us. It didn't take long before the comments began stacking up beneath it. Some were strangers offering sympathy. Others were neighbors wringing their hands, calling me heartless, ungrateful, selfish. A few of the names I recognized from the town church, from the pharmacy, from the grocery store. They had known me since I was a child, and now here they were, swallowing the story as if it were the only truth. For a moment, staring at those words, I felt that old tug in my chest, the need to defend myself, to shout back. But the longer I scrolled, the more I noticed something else. Buried between the judgments were comments from people who remembered. "Wasn't she the one who worked 2 jobs?" one wrote. "Didn't she pay their bills for years?" another added. Little cracks began to appear in the clean, easy version of the story they had told. I closed the app and walked to the small desk in Molly's living room, pulled open the folder I had been keeping for years, and laid everything out in front of me. Stacks of receipts from utility companies, my name printed in the corner. Bank statements showing mortgage payments pulled from my account. Emails from landlords and service techs, each one a quiet record of the years I kept their house standing. I remembered the nights when I had filed away each piece of paper, telling myself it was just for my own record. I never imagined I would need them like this. One by one, I scanned them with my phone, building a chain that no argument could break. That night, as the lights of Portland blinked beyond the window and the bookstore below us closed for the evening, I posted. No long captions, no anger, just screenshots. a line of proof stretching back years. I didn't write a single insult, didn't name-call or twist the knife. I let the dates and numbers do the talking. And then I closed my phone, left it face down on the table, and went to bed. For the first time since this began, I felt the smallest thread of calm settle in my chest. By morning, I knew people would see it. They could choose to believe whatever they wanted, but at least now, for once, the truth had its own place in the room. For the first few hours after I posted, there was nothing but the usual hum of the city outside Molly's window. I thought maybe it would disappear into the endless scroll, swallowed up by other stories. But by the next morning, the air had shifted. My phone lit up in bursts as messages came in, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. At first it was shock, then something more complicated. Neighbors wrote things I never expected to hear, that they remembered me out in the yard with a shovel in the middle of a snowstorm while my uncle watched from the porch, that they'd seen me fixing the leaking roof alone while everyone else sat inside. Old friends from high school said they always wondered how I managed to work so much and still keep that house running. The comments on my post grew longer, and the ones on theirs started to change. No longer just sympathy, but questions, doubt, a kind of slow unraveling of the story they had spun so easily. For once, I didn't have to argue. The truth had started speaking for itself. It didn't take long before the silence from their side broke in another way. My uncle filed papers with the courthouse, a lawsuit full of words like abandonment and theft, as if the years I spent holding their world together had been nothing. Sitting in that cold room with its dull fluorescent lights, I handed over my folder of records, page after page of proof. I watched as the judge flipped through them, saw the dates, the amounts, my name printed again and again where theirs had never been. There were no raised voices, no dramatic outbursts, just a slow, undeniable clarity as their case fell apart in front of everyone. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into the sharp autumn air and stood there for a long moment, breathing in until the cold stung my lungs. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was dragging a weight behind me. The sky above Portland stretched wide and clean, and I felt something close to lightness take root in my chest. Now I live in a small apartment on the edge of the harbor, just a few blocks from the water. It isn't much, just a narrow space with slanted floors and a second-hand table I bought from a thrift store, but it's mine. Every morning I make a cup of coffee and stand by the window as the first boats leave the docks, the gulls crying overhead, the air smelling of salt and cold. On the bookshelf near my desk sits a single porcelain figurine I brought from my parents' house, a tiny thing I once kept in a drawer. It reminds me, quietly but firmly, of everything I survived to get here. I look at it some mornings and whisper to myself that this time, finally, I chose myself. And that choice feels like breathing.